Oh. Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar. We are pleased that you can join us today, and today's topic is moving around Merri. My name is Marlon. I will be the moderator for this session. If you have any technical problems, please let us know through the chat. And if you lose connection, you can probably find that closing the browser and restarting solves the issue. I'd like to begin by doing a welcome to country. We acknowledge the Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples as the first inhabitants of the nation and the traditional custodians of the land where we live, learn, and work. We pay our respects to elders both past, present, and emerging, and we also acknowledge and respect the Treaty of Waitangi and the Maori as the original people of Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'd also like to just give a brief introduction into the ITE in case it's one of your first events. This is a US-based organization which has branches across different countries, and obviously we are ITE-ANZ. As you can see, 17,000 members in 75 countries, and new members are welcome. Our sponsors for today are Austraffic, Traffic Works, Hydra Solutions, O'Brien Traffic, Movement and Place Consulting, Lindsay Oxlade Consulting, and Traffics Group. And we also have partnerships with Monash Student Chapter. So we will make this recording available on the ITE-ANZ website in a few days. And if you have any questions for the presenter as we go, you can use the Q&A button and type in your question. And if relevant, also refer to the slide number. In today's presentation, we will have questions at the end. And on that note, I'll introduce our presenter, Zoe McMaster. Zoe works at Merri Sustainable as Merri Sustainable Communities Officer, delivering a variety of transport, behavior change, sustainability programs. Zoe uses behavioral science to understand community enablers and barriers to active and sustainable movement and place in Merri, delivering evidence-based active transport and place-making behavior change programs to create happier, healthier streets for people. Her work in the UK and Australia has focused on piloting innovative approaches to challenge social norms around how we travel. And today she'll speak about why taking a more behavior-led approach to our transport projects can help deliver better infrastructure and better outcomes for our community. I now hand over to Zoe.
Hey, thanks, Marlon. And hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today. Can you hear me okay, Marlon? Yep, cool. All right, I will just share my screen. I think, Marlon, you'll need to stop sharing yours first. All right, great. Can everyone see the presentation slide? All right, great. Yeah, thanks for having me. We are very excited to be speaking today to a whole group of engineers and transport planners and people from other fields and other specialties. We were lucky Merri received the Sustainable Transport Award from ITE 2 years ago now. So been really looking forward to presenting on some of the sustainability and transport programs we do at Merri in the behaviour change space. So just before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that I'll be presenting today from the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation and acknowledge them as the traditional owners and custodians of the lands and waterways in which we live and work. and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So I first just want to set the scene. I'm assuming a lot of people in this call work in transport of some capacity, and hopefully some of you are looking at working in sustainable transport or have projects related to sustainable transport. And I just want people on the call to think about what sustainable transport might look like to them or in their work or in their projects. And if it looks like the picture on the right, the electric car, I can tell you right now, it doesn't look that much different from the picture on the left. So when we think about what sustainable transport really looks like in the future of our cities, we need to think of the context that we are currently in. So we are in a climate crisis, and transport is the largest growing sector for emissions that we know in Australia. We're also in a health crisis. Obesity and inactivity are serious concerns for public and human health in Australia. We're in a social isolation crisis, and we know that a lot of communities are more disconnected than ever. And road safety is a serious issue. So transport accidents are the leading cause of death in children aged 1 to 14. And the list goes on and on and on, right? So if we think about EVs as sort of the future of sustainable transport, and we think about what that's going to look like, really, aside from the tailpipe emissions, nothing much changes in how our streets and our cities operate. We still have the same issues with congestion, with road safety. We just still have very car-dependent cities. We know that there are other options available in the sustainable transport shift. We know that there are the more equitable options. EVs are not necessarily the most equitable option or cost-effective measure, at least in a timely manner. And we know we don't have time to wait. We've got to start acting on these things now, whether it's the climate, the health, the social isolation, the road transport accidents, whatever it is, all of us in our spaces are working for some reason to shift towards rather than just vehicle substitution for a slightly cleaner vehicle, to more low carbon and active modes of transport and public transport. So we need to think, what do we need instead? Well, we've had some fantastic research. We've had research for decades, but we've had some really great research really recently in Melbourne specifically, looking at the fact that 78% of Melburnians want to ride. But they're scared of riding and their interests are a concern. And the number one thing that would support them to ride more is safe, separated bike lanes. So we need healthy, safe streets. We need separation. We know there's evidence for it. So what's the hold up, right? We all just go build some bike lanes, right? For cyclists, we need some bike lanes. Now, before I go to the next slide and tell you, well, one of the reasons that I think there's a hold up, and I'm sure you've experienced this, is I want everyone just for a second to imagine the first thing that comes to their mind when they think of a cyclist. So just hold that in your head. And if it's this is probably the first thing that's coming to mind for most people in the communities that you're trying to build bike lanes in, right? This is what people in Australia tend to think when we talk about cyclists and when we talk about building bike lanes. You know, this is what our traders are thinking. This is what communities in regional areas are thinking. This is what communities all over are often thinking. And so we know that we need the community to think about, you know, safer, better modes of transport. And we also know that when they think about those, they're thinking about these kinds of people, and then they're thinking about these people flying past their backyards on a bike lane that's going to be built outside their local street. So when we get pushback from community and we can't build the bike lane because this is what people's perception is, it in turn means that the only people that are often cycling on our roads are still these people, right? Because they're the only ones confident enough to tackle those painted bike lanes on 40, 50, 60 kilometre per hour roads. So we've got this social norm issue, right? And what I'm trying to get to here is, you know, how this whole process of behaviour change and messaging and community engagement links in directly with the infrastructure projects that you're either planning or you're delivering as an engineer or a planner. So what we really instead want people to think of when we're talking about building bike lanes and safer streets and slower speeds is this, right? We want people thinking of children riding. We want thinking of people, women riding. We want older people riding. We want puppies riding in cargo bikes. You know, we want places where whether you're an 8-year-old kid or an 80-year-old grandmother, you can move around safely. You have access to the amenity and the streets and the spaces that you need. And this is what locals want to see, right? Who can argue with this kind of stuff? But unfortunately, even though we as planners and engineers know that this is what these projects deliver, the general public don't think, these aren't the pictures that come to their mind when we talk about building bike lanes for cyclists. So when we build it, instead of thinking build it, they will come, we really need to start thinking build it and who will come. And if we're building for, and the community thinks we're building for the guy on the left, they're not going to let you build it, and they're going to want you to rip it out if you do. And the whole process of that community engagement, everything just becomes really painful because this is what they're thinking. So what we really need communities to see is more of the picture on the right? We need to see more of that on their streets. So when we talk about creating safer streets, that's what they visualize, that's what they think of. And you know, I think people really know what they see. And if you don't see people like you riding a bike, you won't feel like people should, like you should ride a bike, even if a bike lane is built, right? So it's about creating that appetite for infrastructure because it's something that we can feel like is for us and for the general community. It's about then activating that infrastructure so we actually see the people that we've built it for using it, and then it's about activating those communities and building their capacity so they demand more of it. So something I like to think about is that infrastructure provides new options, but behaviour change programs encourage new choices. And ultimately, when we build active and sustainable transport infrastructure, we need communities to choose to use it. We need them to champion it, and then they need to demand more of it. And so implementing behaviour change programs alongside infrastructure is really key to ensuring our transport projects have meaningful and lasting impact in the communities that we're delivering them in. So this is how the next part of what I'm going to talk about is the behaviour change programs that we're doing here in Merri. But this is how I want you to sort of think about how these projects might be linked or could be linked in future to the work that you're all doing. So lots of pictures. Like I said, behaviour change programs are about encouraging a wider variety of people to walk and ride and create a more diverse and equitable social norm of who uses our streets in sustainable ways. So here's a few pictures of our, I've got a lot of photos, and these are just some of the nice ones from our Ride and Stride program. We've worked with 16 primary schools to date in Merri, so that's 46% of all of our primary schools in the municipality. We continue to work with schools that we've worked with for a few years, and we work with new schools each year. So a few things on this picture you can see on the top left, that's one of our Open Streets programs. So we piloted this initiative with Bicycle Network back in 2021. Since then, we've worked with 9 schools to run Open Streets, which are road closures to car traffic and road opening to kids walking, riding, family scooting, play, directly outside school zones at drop-off and pick-up time. And as a direct result of these Open Streets trials, on the days we run these trials, we see a 20% increase in active travel at those schools. And we also see a new kind of conversation happening around who that road space is for outside schools and kids' safety. In the middle of the page, you can see our mother on an e-bike. So we run over 160 e-bike rebates for local families in Merri, trying to encourage them to switch out their second car for a bike. We know that distance is a barrier. We know that having an electric bike is a really fantastic substitute for a car in the carrying capacity. And we've seen that of the participants, 70% of the people that have signed up for this program are women. On the top right, you can see us repurposing a car parking that used to be a drop-off bay outside schools into a bike parking and planter box area, and that's getting a lot of activation. And on the bottom right, which I'll talk about in a sec, our Open Streets volunteer program. But I think one of the things that I'm so proud of, and I think the potential as working with schools as a kind of first step for behaviour change is that schools aren't just about changing kids' behaviour. They filter out into their communities, and we have schools in all these local little pockets where we can really pilot innovative approaches to how we repurpose and relook at our streets. And it's about changing the community around them as well. So Paris is a really key example of a city that has done this, and it uses schools as the capital of the district in their mission in creating 15-minute neighbourhoods. So in terms of a behaviour change approach, a school community is a really fantastic, first step in getting a community involved and kind of interested in active transport. So one of the kind of fantastic things about working with schools too, and our school-led open streets program, is that we're not only delivering programs in school and council-led programs, we're then creating capacity for community to run their own programs. So we launched our school-led open streets program last year. We work with schools that have done a trial, a pop-up of the open street with Bicycle Network, and we train parents to run their own local road closures. And as far as I'm aware, this is one of the first times kind of at scale that community are activating and running their own street transformations. So this is a fantastic program. We've run it last year. We launched at 2 schools. We have 2 more schools on the way. We have almost 30 parent volunteers now. So these numbers have updated a bit since this infographic was created. And we're seeing parents coming out and championing safe streets for their kids, and we're building that agency and that advocacy in those communities and having them lead their own street programs. So, and they're working, it's a really fantastic opportunity for community to work collaboratively with council to do this. So, we provide the training, we provide the equipment, we set up the program and monitor kind of the logistical background, but they run it, and it's one of a really beautiful kind of second level program that's come out of Ride and Stride, where we're able to give back to community and let them be the champions of their own transformations. And the Ride and Stride program has a lot, like I said, a lot broader influence than just a school. So we're seeing a variety of community champions coming out of this program. So whether that be principals, a mix of parents, teachers, you've got a few principals in this picture either being chalked around or at a bike education collaboration between a Year 6 and a Year 7 school, training kids on how to start planning their own routes as they transition into high school. We've got some parents planting in the planter boxes that we turned from a car drop-off zone into a bike parking area. And I think this really speaks to the power of behaviour change, again, in upskilling the locals that people look to in these areas. These are often the champions in these local areas, whether they're parents or principals. And by working with them and engaging with them in these programs, they become the touch point for shaping that narrative around how those streets near those schools function. Another fantastic benefit of running behaviour change programs and linking that in with infrastructure is the data collection that you can get. So through these programs, we have really rich sources of qualitative and quantitative data. And people want to tell you, right? Like it's really fantastic to have such a working with schools, to be able to work with parents, work with teachers, work with the local residents to hear what their local issues are. We're not doing a catch-all consultation across the community. We're going to specific areas and we're asking them to tell us what the transport patterns are like, what the kind of infrastructure barriers are. So then when we go to design infrastructure or respond to infrastructure concerns, we actually have a really good data source already, instead of having to go out to community where often you'll find the loudest voices, whether they be for or against, are the ones that fill out your community consultation. And I think for a lot of engineers historically, community consultation is scary and it's a bit of a tick box exercise sometimes. And I think if you can do some of that through behaviour change programs that you're running alongside these infrastructure programs, you actually get a much richer picture of what's going on in those communities. And of course, you need to ask the people that are using it. So for our schools, we ask the kids like what's important to them. And it's not only important because it gives them social license and it gives them some autonomy and some say in how they want to travel. It's also important in building that social norm in the community of reminding parents that actually the main thing that kids don't like about their journey to school is cars. It's traffic, it's noisy, and I think we sometimes downplay the importance of asking our more vulnerable road users what their experience is, and we sort of elevate the same loud voices in the room. And kids are one of the number one indicators of parent behaviour change. So if you can get kids on board, which they're already on board with walking and riding, you ask any kid, that's how they want to travel. And I have asked over 2,000 kids, and that is what they always say. Elevating that data and bringing that back into the messaging is really important in changing people's perceptions and changing people's habits, because there's nothing like a kid nagging you to say that they want to ride, everyone's riding, to make you start looking into that as a parent. It's much more powerful voice than counsel, I can tell you. Another part of this data and the importance of data is feeding it back to the community. So often we do this consultation, we tick the box, and then nothing happens with it. And if something does happen with it, often the community don't know about it. They don't get told, thanks for giving us, telling us what you thought, and here's what we did with it, and here's what it's led into, and here's the outcomes of this thing that you were a part of. So it's really important, to feed back the outcomes of your programs, whether that be infrastructure or behaviour change, and involve them in kind of that distribution of that material and acknowledging the kind of content that they put into that. It's important, obviously, for building an evidence base for your programs and infrastructure, but it's also just a really fantastic way of building rapport. And the more pictures and quotes that you can put in it, the better. Sometimes we are very stat and transport lingo heavy in our reporting. Community don't understand that. Community don't want to see that. They want to see what impact it's having in their local area and what the positive or negative success stories are. So, of course, we're doing all this stuff on the outside. We've got to practice what we preach a little bit when we're talking about changing the social norming around transport and cyclists and that mentality. So we've run a program last year with our staff where we offered a 1-month free trial of a refurbished Dutch bike through Ride Cola. 72% of the staff that signed up for this trial usually drive to work, and councils, if any of you work for a council, often councils are one of the largest employers in your municipalities in terms of car trips for work. At least in our sort of residential council they are. So it's really important that whilst we're going out there telling community that they need to change their transport patterns, that we also look inside at what we're doing here to support that. So that was a fantastic trial. 80% of the staff that signed up said that they're going to look to start riding to work more often. A few of them have gone on and bought e-bikes post that trial. And we actually ran that in May. So it shows that weather is not the barrier that Melbourners make it out to be when it comes to riding. Again, it's safe infrastructure, and it's knowing that other people like them are doing this, and feeling, that there's a program of support around it. Another thing we've done is we've got an e-cargo bike in council. So we noticed that a lot of our trips by staff that ride for work trips, they were just making on their own bikes. And then anytime they needed to transport anything, even just a small banner, they'd have to book out a council car. And as part of our climate targets and our zero carbon strategy, our fleet policy, we need to look at transitioning some of those car trips to more sustainable forms. So we got a really fantastic cargo bike. We trialled it for 12 months to see if people actually wanted to use it. We leased it from Logan Carry, and then we've since just last week clocked over 1,000 kilometres of riding on that cargo bike, and it's been Sydney Road Music Festival, Midsummer, Pride. It's been everywhere. It's done 1,000 kilometres in and out of Merri. So another just program to show people what the options are instead of just waiting on infrastructure responses. And I'll try and play this video. You can just see this is one of our staff members who is using his massive driveway to park his new bike. He's very excited about it. And his little dance there, as you can see. Shuckers there. Another thing we're doing is inclusive transport behaviour change. So we know that there are a lot of barriers, especially to women and people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds to riding. So even if we build bike lanes, are these people going to feel comfortable using them? So one of the programs that we've run in the last year is bike maintenance workshops for women, non-binary, trans and gender non-conforming residents. We've had almost 120 women trained in bike maintenance. 72% of those individuals said that the space being for women only encouraged them to sign up, and 80% are now more likely to ride their bike for transport after those sessions. And we've had a wonderful female instructor of those sessions, and they have been really popular, booked out every time, and we're running them through our library program. So again, just because we have a bike lane, do people know if they get a flat tire, how to repair it? It's a really simple thing. It makes a big difference in women's confidence riding. If they feel like they're going to be left out in the lurch because they have an issue, they're not likely to ride again. Another program we're doing is a program partnering with the Merri Bug and the Neighbourhood House in Fawkner, supporting a Learn to Ride program. So they're training 20 women from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds in Fawkner to learn to ride. They're doing that through one-on-one training sessions plus group rides, and it's been a really fantastic program. Some of these women have never ridden a bike before. Some of them have never been allowed to ride a bike before. Some of them haven't ridden since they were a kid, and a lot of these women often don't have access to driving, don't have licenses, rely on public transport to get their kids to school, to get groceries. And this program is teaching them how to ride and how to feel comfortable, and having a group around them of women that look like them, that they know, that they resonate with, to learn to ride with. And the last program that we're about to start with Monash University and a few other councils is Project Petal. We're about to do a research piece to look into barriers to young women's riding participation, because we know that, especially in high school, when you're in primary school, that, you know, this gender split is pretty equal of kids riding to school. And as soon as we move into high school and sort of early university years, female bike ridership drops off a lot. So again, just all of these small programs that don't cost a lot, that really mean so much and can bring such a diverse range of people to those bike lanes that you're going to build, and then that support for that infrastructure or that you're planning or building. Another thing that I think is really important with all of this is making sure that whatever program you're doing, whether it's policy, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's behaviour change, is that you get the messaging right. So often we fall short of this, especially in Australia. We know that 60%, and this is based off the Vic Health Common Cause Walking and Bike Riding Framing Message Guide, which if you haven't seen it, you need to download it. It's free online. The link's in the slides. I can put it in the chat after. It's amazing. And they have done a huge amount of research to see that 60% of people actually hold quite ambivalent views around walking or bike riding infrastructure, but they very easily move between being supportive or move between being an opponent, depending on the way we frame our message. So you're always going to have 25-ish% of people that are going to support your stuff, and you're going to have a very loud 15% that don't, and they're often the ones that get the spotlight. But actually, you've really got to target your messaging in that 60%. And so just switching out words, you know, when we're saying we're closing a road, who are we closing it to? Are we closing it to cars, or are we closing it to people? Because many of our road closures aren't closed roads. They're just closed to one type of traffic, you know, one type of transport. Same with streets. People feel connected with streets. It's got a more community feel than a road. Saying sharing instead of reallocating or replacing. Reallocation suggests that someone is losing out. If you say reallocating, there is a sacrifice somewhere, and often people won't, you know, resonate with that terminology. But if we talk about sharing the space more equitably, that resonates with people more. Saying people walking or people riding instead of pedestrians and cyclists, it just humanises it. And thinking back to those pictures before, pedestrians and cyclists have a really bad rep. Like, don't just talk about people using this, the way that people are people driving. You know, we don't call people that drive cars motorists. We call them people driving a car. So we should also do the same when we talk about walking and riding. And the same when we're talking about traffic, name the problem. It's car traffic. It's not congestion. It's not about easing congestion. It's car traffic, and we actually want human traffic. We want people in these streets. As some of our open streets, it's so much human traffic. But just if you can, just one thing is Control F whenever you're putting out a public document or a social media post about a project you're doing, just check how you're phrasing those words, because they make a massive difference in terms of the uptake and support for the programs that you're trying to run. So yeah, next time you have a transport infrastructure project, I really encourage you to think about who you want to use it and who your community that you're about to deliver it in may think will use it. Because if the audience that you want to use it in that community aren't already riding, they're not going to want you to build that project, because they're going to think these guys and you know, guys in suits going to work are going to be the ones, right? Commuters getting to the city are riding. So when you're looking at your projects, you need to think about how you can build capacity in that community before you start your infrastructure, while you deliver your infrastructure, and then after you've finished, so you really get the right activation and the right spread of people using it. So, you know, we want our streets and our minds, I guess, to go from this to this, right? This is a much bigger success story. So there's a lot there, but I think some things to think about. What can you do, whatever role you're in? I'd say the first thing, and one of the biggest, most important things you can do, is just start the conversation. You know, have a critical look at the projects you're delivering and the communities they're going in, and start talking about it with your teams. Then looking at upskilling your teams. So look around at what's worked before in behaviour change. There are so many fantastic examples around Australia, around the world, of when you pair behaviour change with infrastructure, the outcomes being more successful. And I know that Dr. Lauren Pearson and her team are about to release a report on the impact of good infrastructure, and that is actually magnified when you pair it with behaviour change programs. Like I said, that Common Cause values-based messaging guide, they do a training. I would highly recommend get your engineers trained, get your comms people trained. It's a really fantastic course. We've had both our transport and our communications teams trained in that values-based messaging, and then collaborating with your team, so you can be more holistic when you're looking at where your projects are going and where your policies are kind of targeted at. Look at how you can partner with other internal teams, whether you work for private or public sector, to make that program a little bit more holistic. Get to know your community. So, you know, when you're starting a project, lead with the shared values. What do people in that community care about? Do they care about bike lanes for cyclists, or do they care about safer streets for their kids to get to school? You know, thinking about what resonates for both of you, and having a shared vision that you can lead that project with, and involving community champions in the delivery. So like, they are the trusted ones. You're not the trusted one. You're a consultant, you're a council officer, you work for state government. We're not trusted, all right? So that's okay, because we mean really well a lot of the time. But these people in these communities, these are two of our volunteers, they are trusted people in the community, and they really want to be given some agency to start doing this stuff. So work with them in how you deliver your projects. And one of the biggest things, and I think this is hard, but it needs to happen, we need to allocate budget and resource to this. And this is a fantastic kind of numbers. I remember Fiona Campbell from City of Sydney, who's a guru in all of this stuff, spoke about a few years ago at a webinar. You should really, whenever you're delivering an infrastructure project, if you can allocate 10% of that budget to behaviour change programs to activate that infrastructure, and then 10% to monitoring and evaluation, that will be such a huge jump from what most projects in this country are doing right now. It doesn't have to be a lot. It doesn't have to be super comprehensive. You know, it just needs to show that you're actually trying to hit the mark with where your infrastructure is trying to be delivered. So if any of that relates to you, whether or not you work in behaviour change, it doesn't matter. I think there's really things that engineers and planners and people in the space can really draw from the benefits of delivering behaviour change programs alongside their infrastructure. So that's me. Those are my details. You can find out more about all the programs that I've spoken about at our Zero Carbon Merri site. We post blog posts and videos. And yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks, Zoe. Let's just go through some questions now. We've got a few come in. Share. So, but firstly, we've got Chris Hall and Thomas. They both ask more of the sense of the legal liability and issues with parents managing play school streets.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
What is the have there been any legal liability issues? So it's an interesting one because we're the first council to ever try doing this. There are play streets programs across certain councils in Australia, and the regulations vary state to state. We have done a legal interpretation of what the kind of parameters and necessity in terms of traffic management need to be for an event or like a low key community event, not work or construction on a street. And the findings that and the advice that we've been given is that as long as our staff the people that are running these closures are appropriately trained and qualified, we're able to sign off on them running it. So we actually are all the staff that run this, myself included, have an accreditation, an RTO accreditation in traffic management. So we supervise these events, but we sort of audit them. We supervise the first series of them, and we provide training to the parents that run these events. In terms of public liability, that's sort of a shared responsibility between the council, being a local street, and the school for their volunteer public liability. That we've only worked with state schools to date, which have some Department of Education public liability for volunteers that do fates and all sorts of things. Look, we know it's not, I think for the more conservative traffic management work site regulations, it doesn't, it might seem a bit risky, but I would challenge you to think of the normal school environment at drop off and pick up time and tell me that that's not riskier. We've developed a really comprehensive program, and based on our legal review and the traffic management guidance, we have been able to develop up this program, and we're really happy if anybody is interested in learning the process we've gone through and how they might be able to set up something like this in their council. Please reach out, and I'm happy to share the process we've gone through.
all right, thanks. Another question that's come up is Max has asked about Port Phillip Council being strongly opposed to protected bike lanes, and how was Merri able to get that through across the line, I guess.
Yeah, well, we have and we haven't. I mean, there's been protected bike lanes that we've actively had to remove. And that we didn't have a program of, I mean, this sort of, I guess, before my time, but we haven't historically had behaviour change programs delivered alongside where this infrastructure was going in, and it backfired on us. And I know that Port Phillip have struggled the same, and many councils have struggled. And I don't think there's a silver bullet, and I don't think that behaviour change delivered alongside every infrastructure project is necessarily going to always work. But I think it sure as hell makes a big difference, because it says that we're going into these communities, we're asking them what they want to see on their streets, we're open to co-design and to potentially where we're looking at putting in separated bike lanes. Is there a local school in that area? Is there a community centre? Is there a neighbourhood house? Is there a business precinct that we can offer a small amount of meaningful support to say, hey, if we build this, do you think you'll use it? Why not? What are the other barriers that are stopping you? I think often when councils have delivered separated bike lanes, that image of the cyclist pops up, and that has happened with us too. And I think we're really now looking, if we've got a few projects out for consultation at the moment, and we're shaping the way that we're talking about them. We're looking at ways that we can actually work with those communities. Quite a few of the projects now are alongside or near ride and stride schools, so they're working with the communities that have fed into a lot of this qualitative and quantitative data. So we're by no means perfect, but we are learning how we can make sure that our infrastructure, and when we do need to put separated bike lanes in, really links up with what the community wants to see and the type of community who want to use it. Hopefully that answers
Right.
it.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I guess it's an ongoing process of just learning and
Yeah,
yeah,
always.
changing. So we've got another question about the e-bike rebate, and will that be kind of an ongoing program, and would it be also involving maintenance and that aspect of it as well?
So the e-bike rebate program, when we launched it in 2021, there sort of weren't any e-bike rebate programs in Victoria, at least. And we worked, and we still have to date worked with Lug and Carry, who are a subscription e-bike provider. So we offer a free 1-month trial of an e-bike to a family. And they get, no commitment, 1 month free. We've also recently started offering 2 months at 50% off if that's a slightly easier transition to staying on the bike. And then after the month or 2 months, they can decide if they want to continue riding or not. And, the KPI of this program, specifically the e-bike rebates, was not to get everyone to stay on the bikes. It was to get everyone an opportunity to try a bike for the school run. If only 10% stayed on, that's a win, It was just about getting people to think about a different way that they could be traveling. And actually we've seen, between 40 and 50% of people staying on the bikes afterwards. It was just that push that they needed, or an opportunity to try something different. So now we are looking at scaling that program. We're looking at potentially looking at ways that we can target these rebates at lower income households, and potentially kindergartens, maternal child healthcare centres. We know we've learned a lot of what works and what doesn't in terms of targeting the messaging right, and getting the right type of rebate and the right type of bike. But we're scaling up from that schools program.
Right. Tom asks also whether you have a target for how many participating schools that are, and how often you're going to do this open streets run in Merribeck. Is there a goal, or
What was the first part of the question?
do you have a target for how many participating schools there are and how often volunteer-led open streets are going to run in Merribeck?
I mean, we have a target. I have a target. We're already working with almost 50% of the primary schools in some capacity in Merri-bek. I would love that to get up to 80, 90, 100%. But there is only one of me that runs this program currently, so that would need to grow. And in terms of school-led open streets, that's only a 2-year-old program. So we had 2 schools launch it last year, and we really just wanted to give them a year to see how it went before we started offering it to other schools. They love it. It's part of it's a huge part of what attracts people to that school and what people love about that school, that they are so focused on active transport. And they've moved from schools that didn't have a lot of kids traveling actively to, now a majority. And so I would love to have, essentially, we only do these school-led open streets trials with schools that have done a pop-up trial with Bicycle Network or with council, just like a 3-day across 3-week pop-up. And we do a lot of surveying to understand the parent and the resident and the community sentiment and the safety and perceptions of safety. We do traffic counts on neighbouring streets just to make sure that this actually is safe and this is what people want. And if it's not, we don't go and do a school-led one. But so far we've got 4 schools. We're actually about to launch our next school in a few weeks. So if anyone lives locally to Merri-bek, feel free to message me and you can come along and check it out. So yeah, I would love to have more. It's limited by volunteer capacity, and I think in that respect we really we're looking to work and collaborate more with state government on how other councils could scale this, because it does take a lot of work to set this program up from a council officer perspective. And volunteers are fantastic, but they already do so much for our community, and we need to look at ways that we can, scale this so it happens more often outside schools that's not dependent on parent volunteers.
Yeah. There's another question that's coming from Ed. It's actually a couple questions. So what's your advice for our councils with the lowest percentage of on that map at the start, and without money or infrastructure where can they kind of start?
As in with the lowest percentage on
Yes,
the interested but concerned?
I think so from one of your first few slides.
Yeah. I mean, I know that budgets and resources are a massive issue, and I think that's why I sort of said to start the conversation. And I would also, looking at infrastructure budgets and the huge amount of money that goes into infrastructure, and potentially the backlash and the huge amount of resources that go into managing the delivery of that infrastructure because there's pushback. I would suggest a trial or a pilot of pivoting a little bit of that money next time you have an infrastructure project, even just putting aside a small amount of money to dedicate to doing some kind of activation program near it in the lead up or during it, and also doing some data and some monitoring and evaluation of not just traffic counts, like what do community think about this? What's the perception of safety? How do they usually travel? How do they like to travel? If you have a community that does not want cycling, that does not cycle, don't go and put separated bike lanes in. Look at ways that you can actually look at maybe slowing down the traffic, creating, spaces that are easier for people to walk on, more greening, that then just, by linking to that actually benefits cyclists or people that ride bikes. You don't have to just have this very binary approach of we are doing bike lanes or we are doing shared paths or we are doing footpath upgrades. Have it be more holistic, and then and put a, even if it's just one project, look at how you might be able to incorporate community programs more into it, and a little bit of comms and monitoring and evaluation, and see how it goes. Because I think it'll actually save a lot of resource and money further down the line. At least that's been my experience.
Yeah, so just following up from that, also, he's asked about the evidence that behavior programs themselves have been able to deliver a more positive impact.
Evidence
Yeah,
that,
that
sorry, can you repeat that?
evidence that the behavior programs themselves have been able to deliver a more positive impact in terms of.
Well, I mean, in our schools program, we're seeing it. We've seen that schools that have participated in Ride and Stride are seeing, often at minimum a 10% increase in walking and riding. See, I even have to, you got to catch yourself. I keep going to say cycling.
Yep.
It's work. You got to work on this. People that are walking and riding increasing at those schools and in those areas. We've seen the sentiment when people are calling me before an open street, which is usually when we do open streets. I'd say for every 100 residents that we fly out, we get one cranky resident, and they're cranky, and that's definitely subsided over the years now that open streets is more of a people know about it in Merri-bek, but they can't argue with road safety for kids, and they don't argue with safer streets for kids to walk or ride, or for communities to walk or ride, or for the elderly parent to access their house. So that we've felt that change, we've seen that change, we've seen the way that community are now responding to our infrastructure projects when they can see that it's being delivered holistically with other programs and linking with Ride and Stride. We've seen state government being more supportive of us delivering infrastructure projects where we're linking it with Ride and Stride. We've received funding to scope up some infrastructure works directly near Ride. We put in a huge range of projects for funding, and the ones that were selected by state government were the ones that were linked to the Ride and Stride schools. So there's a lot of evidence, I would say, but it might not stack up in your the sort of very restrictive traffic count or engineer evidence base, but I think the community sentiment speaks to a lot more than that.
yeah, it's more, I guess, qualitative than you can't really quantify some of that engagement as
And I think it's
we
sometimes
technically like to do.
reductive to do that. But we are
Yeah.
seeing active travel increase. We've seen at open street schools 20% increases in active travel. We're seeing the ones that are doing ongoing open streets consistently, improving in active travel. We're seeing 20 plus more women in Fawkner trained in bike riding. We've seen 140 women and non-binary residents trained in bike maintenance. Like they are stats and they mean something. And that's why our monitoring and evaluation, you can see on our website, the reporting is it's stats and it's quotes, and it's trying to capture both because that's what people resonate with.
Yep. There's also a question about how you're finding the progress with the 30 kilometers per hour roads areas conversation. How's community feedback been going?
Uh, we are not actively doing a 30 kilometre per hour engagement at the moment. We've been rolling out our 40 kilometre per hour speed changes. I'm pretty sure that's wrapped up, if not almost wrapped up, and has been generally quite positive. That is not, I'm sort of in the kind of behaviour change space, and I haven't been involved directly with the rollout of the 40K zones, but 30 kilometre per hour zones near schools is definitely something that I think we'd be interested in looking into. And again, looking at when we're doing rollouts, if we're not going to do it across the board, then looking at what are the precincts or the places that would most benefit from these slower speeds. And instead of always looking at problem areas, sometimes being more proactive rather than reactive to where we look at implementing these measures.
Right. I think we'll have a few more questions. There's a question about the potential to scale up the program by government, like educational departments and
Yes, we would love to be having those conversations, and we are actively seeking out those conversations across Melbourne, at least, to be talking with Department of Transport and Department of Education about how they can help co-deliver some of these things like open streets and these road safety projects that directly align with the metrics and the objectives that they have at that level. I think some of the regulatory barriers are real. There's been a lot of, I can see questions about the regulatory barriers can be out of date and not fit for purpose when we look at local streets and school streets and places like that. So we have had to put a lot of research and kind of work into making sure that we can deliver a safe program that meets those regulations, but it's incredibly prohibitive to other councils who want to be doing this stuff. So we're looking at ways at the moment where we're working on a report at the moment to sort of quantify the actual impact of open streets. So state government and federal government can come to the table a bit more and see how it aligns with their strategies and objectives. But in order for these programs and all of these things we're doing in Merri to scale across councils and across other cities, we need state government funding and support and a seat at the table to talk about it, because I think local government and often consultancies and, we are the ones that are, especially at the local government level, like it's cradle to grave. We are so in touch with our community, and we are the ones that can pilot and deliver these projects, but we need funding and we need regulatory support and we need that kind of collaboration.
yeah. All right. Just I think one more quick question. Just how is your role embedded in the organization? Is it project funded or more council funded?
My role is part of our zero carbon strategy, our zero carbon team. So I sit within the sustainability team, but I kind of sit across both the sustainability and the transport teams in my work. I my role is to do behaviour change programs in transport and comms and engagement in that space. And I'm very aware that a lot of councils don't have the capacity or the funding to employ a dedicated person on this, which is, I think, why those sort of recommendations I was talking about is that you don't need someone isolated sort of doing this work. I mean, if you've got budget to do that, that's great, but it's more about upskilling the teams you already have. And if you don't have that expertise, then looking at working with community members that might have that expertise and reimbursing them for that time. And I think, yeah, it's fantastic to be in a role that is funded as part of our zero carbon work in the transport space. But it's definitely not something that I would love for every council to be able to have more behaviour change expertise in there, but it isn't something that only solely a behaviour change person can lead. You know, I come from a transport and a psychology background, so you're not going to find and necessarily need that. You just sort of need to think about with more of a behaviour-led kind of lens on your projects.
Yep. Thank you, Zoe. Really appreciate your time today and for speaking. And I think that's pretty much what we have time for today. Thank you everyone for your terrific questions, and we have an upcoming webinar scheduled for the 31st of July. If you're interested, you can save the date. And in the meantime, I hope everyone has a good rest of your day, and yeah, thank you everyone for coming.
Yeah, thank you. And if anyone is interested in reaching out, I can share my slides after, or Marlon ITE can pass on my contact details. So thanks for
Yeah.
having me.
Yeah, any further questions you can send, probably, is it okay if they email you?
For sure. I can, if you just want to email me, I can put my email in the chat now, and I can also, you guys can share the slides afterwards.
Yeah.
My
All
email in
right.
the chat.
Yeah. Sounds good. Yes, the recording will be available, and it will be up in a couple of days on the ITE-ANZ website. All right, everyone, thank you again.